Welcome, friends, to the TeleWellness Hub podcast. I'm a space where listening is not just a simple passive act, it's an act of self-care. I'm Marta Hamilton, your host, and today you are listening in to my chat about all things divorce and life plot twists with licensed professional counselor, consultant, speaker, and coach Anna Saviano. Anna is the owner of Heartland Therapy Connection and is trained in dialectical behavior therapy and certified in EMDR. She has a wide range of professional experience, including working as the intake specialist for sexual abuse and at Two Rivers Psychiatric Hospital early in her career. She's also been an adjunct professor at UMKC and in private practice for a long time. She's a colleague. And I'm just really grateful to have her back on as a repeat guest. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So, we have, if you haven't listened, in season 1, we recorded an episode about life plot twists and what to do when life kind of derails you and you have encountered the unexpected and how to react, how to respond, and how to be goal oriented to kind of rewrite the script of your life so that you can feel empowered and in charge. And a thing that comes up a lot as a major life plot twist, major life change, and that touches on all aspects of life, financial, logistical, in terms of family, parenting, everything is divorce. And so I'm really excited to dive into this topic from an expert's perspective, your clinical background, your consulting, and all things life plot twists. But before we dive in, for those who didn't get to listen in on the first episode yet that we did together, why do you do the wellness work that you do?
I mean, partly because I can't imagine actually doing anything else. This is absolutely my calling, I think, to be in conversation with people, to help people navigate life, career, relationships, personal growth, all of those things, and resolve trauma. That's, my original work has been with trauma of all sorts, sexual abuse, like you mentioned. I've done a lot with borderline personality disorder. Now I'm seeing a lot of vets and first responders. So just really wanting to be of service to people who are having real hard times. That's been the through line, right? Like I've had different jobs and different clients over the years, but the through line has always been, oh my gosh, this is too much. This is too hard. Too much in my face right now. And, I have been able to help people in a lot of those spaces. So that's why, because I love it. And what else would I do?
Yeah. No, I love that because I think when people have a heart, right, for the work that they're doing, it really shines. So I really admire the level of blending of mind and heart that you put into your work. I mean, you have a lot of training, a lot of knowledge, and every time that we get to have a conversation, I feel like we could go on. I just love hearing all your input, and I could imagine from a perspective of a client, how transformative it could be to work with you. So I'm glad that our little recording gets to kind of open the door a little bit to what a private, consultation with you might look like. So when it comes to trauma and divorce, I had pulled up some stats about divorce, and I had seen that one of the top predictors or causes of divorce can be unresolved mental health issues or untreated mental health issues, actually, whether it's depression, anxiety, PTSD, or substance abuse were some of the ones that were listed. And I thought, how interesting kind of this intersect between mental health and divorce, when in terms of one of the causes or predictors. So how fitting that we're speaking with a mental health clinician on the topic of divorce and how to cope with it. Not saying that all divorce happens because of those circumstances, right? I'm speaking as a divorced person also, but it definitely is there in the statistics. So in your experience, what have you seen in terms of how people's lives can feel totally off kilter, totally off their track, just in terms of when encountering divorce or separation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much that goes into it, and maintaining a healthy relationship is really hard. I think that we are not very well equipped. I don't think that there's a lot of ways that we learn how to take care of ourselves in the context of a relationship, or how to prioritize the relationship well. And it can easily, and this is like personal experience, observation, both, that it's easy to look outside and feel like it would just be easier to have one less thing to navigate. And when you talk about bringing mental health issues into it, then you're talking about people who have some symptoms that might be really interfering, lack of motivation and having no energy and being very anxious or possibly paranoid. All of those just makes everything much more challenging. And I think our, kind of world at large doesn't also very well support relationships being sustained, priority on career and money and things like that, that it's easy to just for your relationship to kind of go by the wayside. And then your kids are a little bit bigger or whatever happens, and people have, gotten so far apart and don't have the skills or tools to kind of like forge a path back together. I think that that can be really, really challenging.
Yes, because you bring up a really good point that even in divorce, you may need to continue a relationship with your ex spouse in terms of parenting. So, any kind of strategies that you could recommend or tips, insight recommendations? Granted, I know every single circumstance is unique, and we always put that in the footnote, right? This is not direct advice. This is a general education purposes. But I mean, any insight that you have when it comes to that, with navigating that, considering all these factors?
I think there's two. And of course, like you said, like big asterisk, seek professional help, talk to somebody individually,
Yes.
all of those things.
Yes.
I think two things are critical. One, especially if you're talking about kids and kind of navigating co parenting, is really keeping an eye on the long game. What are you wanting to create for your kids in terms of relationship patterns that they're observing? How do you want to be in the world as a divorced person, as a parent, as an adult, as a human? That it's not just that, it has to be about that bigger picture and where you're keeping an eye on that long game, like I said. The other component that I would say broadly is helpful is to do your own work. It is easy in the aftermath of divorce, whether both parties are totally amicable, it still is a huge, yeah, plot twist, life change that is really going to change a lot of different parts of your life. And sorting through those effects with a professional, probably, close friends obviously are helpful, but really recognizing how big of a change that has. There's plenty of things that you don't necessarily consider until you're living alone and you're the only adult in the house, and all the smoke detectors need new batteries. Like, that's your job. And the trash has to go out, and that's also your job. And there's no groceries, and the toilet's overflowing. I mean, everything comes back to the one adult then, and really trying to figure out how to take care of yourself in that context. What are the stories that you maybe have told about yourself, about your relationship, about your marriage, about your divorce? Just the clarity around that, which also requires an amount of humility and introspection and vulnerability with yourself to kind of look at that. What did I contribute to this? How did we get here? How do I not do it again? Whether marriage is ever, in the cards, but just how do you not repeat the same patterns? All of those things. So really doing your own work, and then also the long game. Those are the two things.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense, especially when you talk about the narrative that we might tell ourselves or look at, especially if you look at the long game, if you want to the long-term outcome, the role we play, the character we will be, if you will, like what qualities, what it look like, being able to look at that future, that desired future, and like really working backwards and looking, okay, like how did things get to where they are now so that we can navigate moving forward.
Yeah, and part of that is how do I want to view myself in the rear view? The fights, the hills I will or won't die on, the fights I will or won't engage in, you know, in 10 years when my kids, who are 13 and 10 right now, you know, when they're legal adults, I want both my previous husband and myself to be able to look back and be like, you know, this isn't exactly how we picked things to be, but we stand by how we did it. And that is important to me, you know, that we're being thoughtful and mindful right now in an effort at doing right by our kids, doing right by ourselves again, so that like that long game is not like, oh man, we were so emotional that we did these reckless things and now we regret it. Thought about whatever.
Right. And you bring up such a good point earlier when you talk about the decision making. It may fall on you as the one adult in the household. And I think that might even relate to looking at the experiencing and like reauthoring or looking at the long-term goal. Sometimes you might be the only one that might take that on, right? We cannot force our ex-partner to also participate in this like shared um yeah, rewriting. And so I mean, you bring up a really good point, is looking at like looking in the rearview mirror. It might be you really kind of driving it and making decisions, even when it comes to that, on top of the new kind of mental load and labor. Like, truly, like, okay, I, you mentioned all the smoke detectors need new batteries, the trash, the art, the all the things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The logistics, groceries, all those things. That's such a good topic to bring up in terms of a misconception, because I think when people think divorce, they might not really consider those factors that play a role in like the story we tell ourselves and our daily roles that we may play. How can, since we were kind of talking about that, like what we might look at, what we take accountability for, where we want to go, how does communication play a role in terms of whether the story, what we tell ourselves, what we tell our children, our ex-partner, like how do you look at that?
You know, I think it was hard won lesson that I learned around I can't make anybody collude with me and my story or have the same story that I have about anything, whether it's my marriage or my divorce or my parenting or whatever. And that was really hard because I want people to buy what I'm selling, right? In terms of this is how it went down, right? And that's not how it goes. You know, I have a story, he has a story, everybody has their own version of things. And it's not that like mine is right and his is wrong. It's just that we are two different people with different perspectives, and really kind of accepting that I have to tell a story and live a story that works for me. And I'm not going to get anybody else's approval per se, or I can't depend on anybody else's approval of that because I have to live with it and it's mine. And so I have to write it how I want to write it also. So parenting and being the kind of ex-partner that I want to be in the world has been, again, like it took a minute to get there, but like, or to get that kind of clarity, but that has been really important to me, is really mindfully choosing that story that I tell myself, how I interact with the people in my life and my kids, and really looking too at what's the story I was raised with by my own family, by my community, by my, you know, church, whatever. that says here's how to do it. And then, my personal experience was like I did everything how you're supposed to do it, like high school, college, married, kids, job, career, all those things. And then half those things fell apart, and it was like, okay, so now what? And really having to figure that out in a way that works for me, because it's not going to be the story that I was scripted and given as a person in the world.
I love that you bring that up because divorce has that like significant upheaval, right, in your life and your identity. And it sounds like you really help clients kind of navigate how to maintain a sense of continuity or even like coherence in their life story. Like, how does this continue? How does this move forward? Even while undergoing that significant, like, picturing like a wave, you're tossed, you don't know which way's up, which way's down, like your swimsuit's falling
Oh,
off, like what's going
100%.
on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a high dive story in there
Yes.
somewhere. I'll tell you at a different time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because it is so chaotic. And there's the basic stuff, where are you going to live? What's the schedule going to be? Some of those things. And I think a lot of times in what I see with clients is that is like a really important first phase, right? And you have to get through that. How are you going to actually pay your bills, and who's going to take your kids to school, and where are they going to sleep, and all those things. And then that gets situated and you get a little bit of a rhythm with that. And then you're an adult in the world by yourself, perhaps in a way you've never been before. And what does it mean that I'm divorced? And what does this mean? And what does that mean? And that those things just are hard to figure out. And that's where there's like this other layer of work that I think can be kind of overlooked, because the logistics are obvious. Like, you have to deal with that stuff, but you don't have to do the next phase. But I think it's really important. You can get by not doing that kind of work, but I don't advise it.
Yeah. No, yeah, and especially from your perspective with your specialization in trauma and yes, your perspective really looking at that. Like you mentioned, the stories we might have even told ourselves or have been told to us in our childhood, in our different communities, those all play such a big role. Uh yes. What about with the process of closure or transition, since you bring that up? Like, okay, next chapter, we're transitioning to a new chapter. We need to, like, let's close out like the previous chapter as we start a new one. What are your recommendations? Like any ritual, symbolic acts, like exercises that you might recommend?
I mean, I've definitely been known to like light some things on fire here and there, like in a contained way. But I like
Yeah.
I like that sort of process. Journaling, I think, is good, because I think that there's always something that comes from that that's like a little unpredicted. I don't know that I think closure is necessarily a goal as much as it is all part. I mean, I kind of feel like closure is when you die. So to me, it's let me make sense of this, and then you get more information, and then you kind of make sense of it again, and then your kids grow up, or you're in a new relationship, or whatever happens, and there's just kind of like more to integrate and figure out and all of that. And that's where that's where the work is, and that's what I think is interesting. And that the expectation is not that someday I will be done. There's certain things that get wrapped up, but there's just always more stuff to process and consider and think about, and ways to grow and expand. And I think that's really cool. And that's so I'm not looking probably for closure in that way.
hmm When you said not closure, but making sense of it, I mean, that really resonated because I think there's a lot of questioning of like, why? Why did this happen? Why? There's a lot of why, at least for in my experience and just what I've observed also and experience with others. It's just a lot of why. Why? But I did this the right way and I did all the things. Yeah.
And there's a lot there too with like identity, right? Like, if you were raised and believed and thought that this is how it would all go. And then all of a sudden, that identity of being a wife is no longer, or, I mean, that's obviously the big one with divorce or husband, but like that loss is something to grieve. Even if you wanted a divorce, even if it all is for the best and all those things, it still is a change in identity. I mean, you have to check a different box on like medical forms now. That
Who's your emergency contact,
exactly, like
Yeah,
those things are
yeah.
real considerations that are not impossible to navigate by any means. And I think giving yourself lots of grace and compassion through that process of course it's hard. This isn't what you expected. And I think we're getting there in some community ways of creating more space for that kind of thing, especially because there's so many divorced people and all of that. But that also means like you're going to have to do the legwork, right? Like make sure that you're getting those communities set up and all of that.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the majority of people are experiencing divorce, but as you bring up, our community, our society isn't necessarily constructed in a way to support that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of like blame and shame that still go on. And, some of that is very justified and makes sense. And that's to sort through. But also, what we're doing doesn't seem to be working as is. So seeking information in that department of finding community, finding other people, and I think not just trying to keep doing everything that you've been doing just by yourself. Like it just has to be different altogether.
Yeah. And it sounds like with that understanding or gaining a greater sense of who you are, where you want to move, or how you want to move forward, there's a lot of action, like a landscape of action, if you will, in terms of exploring empowerment and agency and accountability and moving forward. And I feel like that would be really great to do in community, right? When in support, with support of others. It's hard to do it alone. It's hard.
I was just saying, I don't think we're meant to be doing very many things like this, alone. I think that is not recommended.
No, absolutely. I absolutely. I think even things that are great. I'm just thinking about things that I might enjoy, whether it's yoga. I could do my own practice, but there's something about doing it in community. And there's running. You could do it alone, but there's also about doing it in community and races and marathons. And I think there's something that even things that we enjoy and that we feel are really good for us, feel good in community. Absolutely. Then the things that are hard would be great in community as well. So yeah, I really like that you bring insight into that. In terms of kind of exploring and diving into moving into resilience, right? Like after there's an acknowledgement, this is what happened. Now we can dive into resilience. What are some initial signs that you're entering the chapter of like some resolution, some understanding? Because I think if people are listening and are going through divorce, recently divorced, are separating, considering it, wondering, should I stay, should I go? They know that chaotic feeling of like being in the wave, the high dive, all those metaphors. What are some things that you've seen, experienced, observed that can give people hope that they're entering out of it into like an opportunity to breathe and have clarity for where they're going?
I think it's two sides of one coin. It's letting go of that story of how it's supposed to be, that very narrow lane of like, the only way to do life is like this. When you can let go of that and then be creative in terms of, so if I don't have like a husband in my house to help do things, how else can I do things? What do they call it? Body doubling, like with ADHD or that kind of thing. Like where you are involving other people in your community, with your kids, with other things, but it's a creative endeavor. Like you have to think about things differently than the way that narrow lane prescribes. And if you're only just trying to keep doing it how you've been doing it, is where more suffering happens than if you can kind of get into that acceptance of like, my life isn't going to look the way that I thought it was or the way it was supposed to or whatever, but I can make a really awesome life in a different way when I can engage more creatively.
Mm-hmm. I love that you help reframe or help people step out of that space of just the suffering and into a space of creativity. I love that, and being able to feel creative about their future and to engage in that when it comes to their life. For those that want to connect with you, they're experiencing their own life plot twists. They need some help kind of authoring their new life, their new chapters moving forward. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Absolutely. Instagram for sure, Anna Saviano, LPC, but I also have Life Plot Twist. My website is under construction, but should be hopefully maybe by the time this airs up and running. Instagram is probably the best way, or, reaching out through my practice website at Heartland Therapy Connection.
Wonderful. And you work with clients nationwide in terms of your consulting, correct? I just want to confirm.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
nationwide. Okay.
Yeah, licensed in Missouri and Kansas, but for therapy purposes, but yes, consulting.
Nationwide. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for connecting with us and for being a part of our wellness journey today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.